One of the awesome benefits of volunteering for Duke is that you get to know other Duke people that you might not have contact with. That's precisely how I got to know Pola and Dave, through giving back as an alum. And so we're thrilled to have both of them together with us. I am on the 46th floor of Alston and Bird's offices in Atlanta. So shout out to my colleagues who are on with us. Pola, are you in Atlanta?
I am. I'm on the first floor of my home.
Wonderful. And Dave is coming to us from California. How are things there, Dave?
I'm in Palm Springs, where it's only going to be 93 degrees today.
Well, good.
Short sleeves.
So I have lots of questions for you guys, so let's jump right into it. So Pola, let's talk a little bit about your career journey. What was your first job out of Duke, and how did you end up, being part of the Warner Media team?
Yeah, it's a long, circuitous story bringing me to this role. I thought I wanted to be a journalist coming out of Duke, not because I ever wrote for the Duke Chronicle, but because I loved All the President's Men, the movie. That was kind of my exposure, and I loved to write. So I worked for a small paper in Boston for a couple of years, but realized what I really wanted to do was write for the movies. So I went to grad school and went to Northwestern, which is beautiful. And that ultimately put me on a path for entertainment that twisted and turned and ultimately put me in a place that I never could have imagined. TCM didn't exist when I was in college. When I was studying film, there was no such thing. There was no such outlet. So the fact that this became an opportunity for me was just no small miracle.
That's great. So Dave, a similar question for you. I think, you'll be recognized by many of our participants here because you've been on their televisions from time to time. Tell us about your career trajectory after you left Durham.
Similar to Pola, I knew I wanted to do something either related to the entertainment field or the journalism field. I just wasn't sure what, but I was obsessed with music and film and TV as a kid, and just sat listening to my Mickey Mouse record player literally all the time as a really young kid. When I was at Duke, every summer I would do a different internship back home in New York where I grew up. So I worked for a PR firm for a summer, decided that wasn't really for me, worked for MTV for a summer, had a good time, but again, it wasn't the perfect fit. And then my third summer, I got an internship with Entertainment Weekly magazine. And that was kind of my eureka moment where I realized this is what I want to do. My writing style was a perfect fit for the magazine, kind of an informal, colloquial, sometimes snarky writing style. So I stayed in touch with them throughout my whole senior year. And 2 months after I graduated, I was hired as an assistant in the movies section of the magazine, working for an amazing guy named Mark Harris, who has now become a renowned movie historian and author. And I've actually now gotten to interview him on TCM, which is just a crazy full circle moment because he just wrote a book about Mike Nichols within the last year, which has gotten rave reviews. So for 17 years, I was on staff at Entertainment Weekly, kind of working my way up from intern to senior writer, ended up writing 50 cover stories for the magazine during my time there. And soon after I started as a writer at the magazine, I also started doing the occasional interview on the radio or on television to talk about movies or entertainment trends in general. And in the year 2000, which is crazy to think that it was 21 years ago, I was given the opportunity to go on the Today Show just one time. And I went on with Katie Couric, and it went well enough that the producers offered me a regular spot off of that 1.5 minute segment, which was a shock and a real pleasant surprise to me. So over the last 21 years, I've been on that show about 200 times. And I'm so grateful that a few years after that, if I remember correctly, Pola, I met you at our mutual reunion because our classes end with the same number. So
it's because we're the same year.
Of course, right, yes, that's really what I meant. So we met at a reunion, I think in 2005, and we started staying in touch. And when Robert Osborne, who was the original host of Turner Classic Movies, fell ill. He has since passed away, unfortunately. But when he was too ill to film, they needed a fill-in host. So I think Pola kind of helped get me on board to become a guest host. And then I became an official host on TCM 3.5 years ago. And it's been an absolute joy.
That's awesome. So we all share Duke. So question for both of you. Let's start with you, Dave. What part of your Duke experience would you say helped you most in your career, both with TCM and otherwise?
I would say two things. One, even though I was an English and psychology double major, I was able to take a couple of classes that were related to what I would eventually be writing about and talking about on television. I had a great advisor named Susan Willis, took a couple courses with her. And I also took a class that my parents thought I was crazy for signing up for, called Hollywood Film Music, where they were like, we're paying for this. And it ended up actually being a super helpful class. And I wrote a term paper on the music and on the waterfront. And so things like that were helpful. But more than that, and this is something I've said to people before, it's the people that I met at Duke. Specifically, I was in Rhythm and Blue, which is the co-ed a cappella group on campus. And we had a lot of divas in the group, male and female. And I was the director of the group. So it was my job to kind of keep the peace and keep the harmony, as it were, literal
Nice.
and figurative for the group. And I will tell people all the time that any Hollywood star who might be temperamental is nothing compared to some of the people that I was in this a cappella group with. So it actually taught me to deal with being at Duke taught me to deal with a lot of different, very dynamic, creative personalities.
Love it. And interesting that some of those experiences were not in the classroom, right? It was what you were doing with your free time that helped shape your career. Pola?
It's such a good thing to think about, like what spawned all of this, or what the experiences are in your life that push you forward. And sometimes they can be a bit random. I think I had always loved movies. I'd always been obsessed with television. My parents limited me to an hour a day, and so every hour was heavily researched. And I was really careful because I couldn't just blow the hour. And I think that made me see the sort of media as a treat and as something that you kind of earned, which is weird because, then my job is having a TV on all day, every day. So it's kind of ironic now that it's almost wallpaper. But at Duke, my experience was I was a psychology and political science major and loved both of them deeply and assumed that would be the direction I went in, either as a journalist or a lawyer or something. But I started taking film classes there, and it sort of lit my brain on fire, the idea that you could look at movies like you look at fine art, that you could really have sort of a critical approach to understanding and reading movies was absolutely new to me and thrilling. And I just got it in a way that I didn't always get reading literature. Like sometimes I needed more help, but movies I completely synthesized readily. And really there was no film program, it was part of the English department then. There was no doc studies program or certificate. All the things that are available now would have been so delicious for me. But it was that experience that sort of sparked this interest for me, this deeper commitment to movies. Not that I thought there was a career behind it. So it was more that this would be the coolest hobby for my life. And I did, feed that interest for years after as a hobby. That was the real heyday of home video stores. And you could find, like I was living in Boston, there was this incredible place, Videosmith, that had the most eclectic, really highly curated and interesting collection of movies. So I would just fill more of my interest with that. But I think the other thing at Duke that really maybe helped was, to Dave's point, you're surrounded by so many interested people. And it's not necessarily that I was committed to projects that were forming me this way, but I think it was just meeting such a diversity of folks with different interests. I think what I did learn at the time was we had this little TV, the local TV developed a soap opera called Life on the Quad, for those of you who remember. And I never thought of myself as an actor, but I auditioned because it was fun and I was a senior and what the heck, and had the best time and got more exposure to production through that. So again, those experiences weren't necessarily a focus or a concentration, but they sparked an interest that has endured.
I need to see this.
Oh yeah, you do.
Yeah, please tell me that's on YouTube.
Oh, I hope not.
So so I'm sure many people, who joined us who don't already know you two were probably interested in or are fans of TCM. So Pola, since you're running TCM, let's talk about that just to sort of set the framework. Like, what is it? What does it do? What's its mission?
Yeah, Turner Classic Movies has been around 27 plus years as a cable channel and has basically created an audience for classic film when these movies were hard to get your hands on. You might have been able to get access to some of them, like the sort of the top 20, top 40, hits, as it were. But what TCM has done over time is really develop through curation and context, and with the incredible superpowers of our hosts like Dave, we've created a dialogue around these movies that makes them consistently interesting. We introduce you to things you might not have seen before, and hopefully to things you never thought you'd be interested in. I think that's part of it. Discovery is one of the greatest joys of being a movie lover. So that is, our mission is absolutely to make sure these films continue to be vital, continue to be relevant. And a lot of work we've just done this past year in terms of marketing and positioning and thinking about the kernel of what TCM needs to be going forward. We really decided to focus even more on how we can bring the conversation around classic film to a point of intersection with contemporary culture. And that's been some of the most exciting work we've done in this last year, is really thinking through a contemporary lens, questioning, films when they were made 70, 80 years ago. What has changed since in terms of race, class, gender, all these conversations that we can host as a network. We are super open to dialogue. We want to interrogate these movies. And it makes for a really exciting place because we do have these conversations on staff as well as with our audience.
Yeah, that's interesting, especially with your point at the end about class, race, and all that stuff. Because of your commentary, you don't just show something without, sort of that discussion around it, so that if there are things in the movie that sort of are appropriate to be talked about now, there's space for it to breathe and for you guys to address those issues. Is that right?
Yes, it's so important, in thinking about contemporary audiences. We need to help them understand both where this comes from, but also why it's still relevant. We don't want to cancel movies. We want to host the conversation around them. It's what we talk about, Dave, like all the time, right? And then it's also a question of how much in the mix are you talking about this stuff? You don't want to hit people over the head with it, but you want to create a sense that we are aware of some of the complexities of these movies. We understand through modern eyes, some of these things are hard to look at, but if you don't look at it, you're not going to learn, you're not going to be able to propel forward, real critical understanding of movies when there's so much goodness, even mixed in with some of the hard stuff. We're absolutely excited about where that puts us in the conversation. It sort of modernizes these movies when you can keep talking about them against a contemporary environment.
So Dave, because of your experience at Entertainment Weekly, was when Pola reached out about, coming on board, was it an easy yes for you, or what were your thoughts about, jumping on the TCM team?
The easiest yes ever. And what's really fun is that I'm trying to remember when it was. It was about 2007 or 8, when Robert Osborne was still hosting on TCM. I was brought down to represent Entertainment Weekly because my area of expertise when I was at the magazine, and still today, is the Oscars. I'm obsessed with the Oscars. I've always have been. I've gotten to host the red carpet show on ABC on the Oscars, and I wrote about it for many years at EW. So I was brought down to co-host a weekend every year for a month. We do 31 days of Oscar on TCM, where for a month we only show Oscar-winning and Oscar-nominated movies, which of course is my favorite month on the channel every year. But I was brought in to co-host with Robert. So I think that was kind of my toe dip into TCM all those years ago. And then, as I said, in 2016, when Robert was ill, that's when Pola and then the head of talent at the time, this lovely woman named Darcy Hetrich, reached out to me and said, would I come and be a guest host for basically a month at a time? And of course I said yes. And it was such fun. And it was work, but it didn't feel like work, which is the best kind of work. And so now there's 5 of us that are hosts on the channel. We have Ben Mankiewicz, who's our main host, who's been there for 15 plus years, the grandson of Herman Mankiewicz, who wrote Citizen Kane, and just with this wealth of knowledge. Jacqueline Stewart, who's a former film professor who does our silent films. Alicia Malone, who's this lovely Australian woman with such an encyclopedic knowledge, particularly of foreign language film and more independent film. Eddie Muller, who was our film noir expert. And then I'm there, and my expertise or interests really are the Oscars and anything that relates to music or musicals. And I also get to host the LGBT related content most of the time, which is very important to me. So that's what's so great about the 5 that they've kind of put together at TCM, the 5 of us host. We love each other. We have so much fun in the rare cases where we get to be together, because usually we're hosting by ourselves, but they're putting us together more, which is so much fun. But we also have, different skill sets and interests to kind of bring to the table. And I think that's what really makes it interesting.
Yeah, I mean, these folks are killer subject matter experts, and it makes everything we do like truly this authentic conversation. They're not reading off a prompter, right? They really know this stuff and bring to it also different perspectives that are helpful to us, both as programmers and as marketers. Like there is such a push-pull on what it is we're going to say about a film or a festival, how we're presenting it. I mean, I think the thing that, to your point, Dave, the reason it's fun too is that everyone at the network cares so deeply about this space, these classic movies, and we're really interested in bringing them to a broad audience, as broad as possible. So we're always kind of thinking through, how can we open the door a little bit for someone who might not think this is for them? We want it to be for them.
So intentionally broad question. So like, what is the future of classic movies? Because I think, unlike other times in the last 20 years, it is a little more maybe unknown right now what the future of classic movies is. How would you answer that, Pola?
I honestly think it's never been better, kind of looking back through what we call sort of like the revelation, really of people starting to look at classic films in the 60s, 70s, and especially as film programs were being developed. It was a small group of people who had access to these films, either because they were studying them or because they were in cities like New York or LA, where there were great rep houses where these films would have been shown. The beauty of the sort of VHS phase, the home video phase, was suddenly some of these titles started to escape the libraries and out of the ivory towers. And that's really cool. I think the bit of the shift was as there became only Blockbuster, you got kind of a smaller sampling of that. So I think that's where, interestingly, TCM stepped in to fill and grow this incredible category, really. And what is interesting, to your point, is people who are big classic movie fans are often really concerned. They're on edge because there is always a worry that the opportunity to see these films, that presentation is going to go away. Whether it's studios stopping really sort of the home video distribution of these titles, or other sort of rep theaters going away, which has been really a sad and problematic thing. It's just harder and harder. But TCM, believe me, we're doing really well. It's a strong business. And the neat thing for us is, over time, we've also evolved different ways to bring classic movies to people who are into this world. We have a in real life film festival in Los Angeles, except for the last 2 years of the pandemic, which is an amazing opportunity. People from around the country and beyond come to Hollywood to where these movies would originally have been screened. And with the help of our incredible hosts, you're brought in through 4 days of movies into that world with people who are really as obsessed as you are. We have special panels, presentations, restorations, getting the full treatment on the big screen, a fancy red carpet event. I mean, it really is sort of this, we always joke it's Comic-Con for classic movies. It's people who feel very deeply about it. We have a TCM cruise as well, which we're already on sale for fall 22. So, again, people join us for basically a film festival at sea with all the benefits of a beautiful cruise vacation in the background of this really fun festival. So there are things like that we do to also bring fans closer to classic movies at whatever level they're interested. We want to be wherever they are.
Dave, question for you that we got a lot of people wrote in advance. How does TCM define a classic movie? What is a classic movie? Do you ever make exceptions for something that's not quite as old but is headed towards a classic? What are those conversations like internally?
I think the sweet spot for the network is movies from the 30s to the 60s. That's by and large what you're going to see. And I would even say more 30s, 40s, and 50s. But then there are several times per year where it broadens out a little bit. And the two examples I would give are the 31 Days of Oscar month, which I was talking about. That's usually in February. And then also in August, we do a very popular series called Summer Under the Stars, where each 24-hour day is devoted to one star. Sometimes it can be someone huge like Katharine Hepburn or Bette Davis. Sometimes it's more of a character actor who you really get to learn more about, like Cuddles Sakal or someone like out of nowhere. So in those 2 months particularly, there's more opportunity for us to show, let's say for the Oscar month, to show a movie like Dreamgirls or The Artist, which won Best Picture from 2011, or Hugo, Martin Scorsese's film. So if it fits in with kind of the Oscar theme, or if it's the Summer Under the Stars, we did Robert Redford for Summer Under the Stars this year, and we showed The Last Castle, which is a movie from the last 20 years. So it's not something that happens a lot, but it's something that I always welcome. And in fact, around the holiday time, each of the 5 hosts, we get to program our own night. And my night is January 1st, and we each got to pick 2 movies. So I very purposefully chose one from the 30s, one of my favorite Cary Grant movies, Penny Serenade. And then I also chose a movie from my childhood, which is Children of a Lesser God from the mid-1980s, maybe one of my top 3 favorite films of all time. And that's important to me because I like the definition of classic to expand a little bit. Pola's heard me say this, I liken it to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where every year there's a new class of people, and I think you have to have debuted 35 years ago that year or older in order to be considered for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I personally think that as years go by, another class of movies from, let's say, 30, 35 years ago that year should now be considered classic. I know that we have fans who bristle at that idea and think that forevermore classic films are only from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. I would welcome an expansion of that definition because I think it makes it more interesting and exciting.
Pola, are you going to hot take disagree with Dave and tell him?
I am so going to hot take. No, you're right. From a business standpoint and from a day in, day out standpoint, our business is modeled on those films from 30s, 40s, and 50s. They're the libraries of our company, and it makes a lot of sense for us to be the place for those. And you cannot get many of them in a lot of places. But as Dave says, we're also always eager to stretch our arms beyond that. And just, looking at our calendar, I guess I can't look for next year, I'll blow it. But there are, for example, a focus on Black independent filmmakers. That's not from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. We want to continue to talk about the ways that the ripple effect of these movies from decades and decades ago continue to impact more current movies. And one of the things I always think about, and the Hall of Fame is a good one too, is you go to the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and these paintings are 80 to 100 years old, but they're presented through this lens of how do you appreciate them now? What do they mean for culture now? What have they influenced? How do we read them differently? I think it's what you bring to the movies, wherever they are on the timeline, from a, really a critical understanding from where are they in history? What did it mean at this time? Like, I think about the movie Get Out. I mean, that's a classic, yes, it is recent, but that is going to reverberate as a point of culture for years to come. And I think that's what's really cool. You can't always call it because you're in culture, you're in it at that moment. But I do think that that is something you start to understand is like what is the discussion around it? What else does it mean when you talk about a movie like that? But yes, and I think the other thing that's great for us is, if you guys are familiar with HBO Max, our company's streaming service, there's a TCM hub section within HBO Max, and that's a place where we have more latitude. We're talking to younger audiences there because they're a streaming audience. So, naturally they tend to be younger. But also we have access to more contemporary films. So our excitement is having a chance to work within that space. We already did it in a big way once. We had a virtual film festival back in May when we couldn't do our in real life Hollywood festival. And our programmers and team had a chance to really dig in to what we have available in HBO Max, more contemporary titles, really great, exciting conversations. Again, our hosts add so much to bringing those movies closer to you, giving handles on them, guardrails, way to get into them. And it was really successful. So we look forward to doing more of that in time to come.
So Pola, there have been some big changes, fairly recently to TCM. And I feel like because TCM is a brand people care about, that when you make changes to it, like people are always sort of have their guard up. So what have you been doing and how has your audience responded to it?
Yeah, I've been at TCM for 13 plus years, I guess it is. And every phase of anything we move, change, eliminate is always met with great concern and anxiety. And I think it is because they feel so deeply about it. You don't hear about that when ABC, updates the news open. People aren't freaking out. They might freak out if you move their anchor, but it's like for our audience who are so devoted to the network and who are with it in their living rooms in a really intimate way, when we change, an opening jingle for something, they get concerned. So we know that. And again, I've been through many of these, so I have an understanding of it. But this one was pretty radical for us, a very different new logo, but completely within that frame of, we want to alert people to the possibilities of our approach to movies. We want to get people excited outside just the family we have now. We want to get people excited in HBO Max and beyond. This is a brand that's going to live on and morph, because that's just how media works. I think when I was starting out, the great excitement was home video. And then it was, DVD ROM. And then it was cable kind of coming up at the same time. Then it's streaming. It's like, there's always going to be disruption. I think more than anything, it's a strong brand like TCM that can ride that wave to whatever the next business model is. And that's where our heads are very much with this sort of brand refresh. It's like, how can we ensure we're future-proofed?
Dave, changing topics a little bit. So because you've been involved in the film industry for so long, you've been involved in and probably been to so many film festivals, right? So you've had the opportunity recently, or not recently, but since you've been at TCM, to be involved in the TCM Film Festival. Give us a sense for people who haven't been there, like what's that like? What is TCM trying to accomplish? And how much fun do you get to have as one of the hosts to not be in front of a camera, but be up on a stage?
Well, and I would say this answer applies to the film festival and also the cruise that Pola mentioned. So those are our two kind of in-person events, because I've had some crazy experiences on that cruise too. On the cruise in 2018, we had some special guests with us, like Cicely Tyson was on our cruise. I mean, and she would end up passing away only about a year later, and she was just tremendous. And I got to do two very long interviews with her on stage in front of the audience, and that was something I'll never forget. Mitzi Gaynor, the classic musical star from South Pacific, I'm going to wash that man right out of my hair. She was on our cruise, so I got to do an hour-long interview with her, and she was hilarious. And I've actually stayed in touch with her and just went to her 90th birthday party. about a month ago. One of the first things that she did after COVID, after being very, very careful during COVID. So that was exciting. But also the film festival is a thrill because the TCM talent team does such a great job of getting a lot of people to come to these festivals, whether it's an in-person festival. And there's Eva Marie Saint on our red carpet, and I get to ask her about, co-starring with Cary Grant in North by Northwest. I mean, come on. Well, Michael Douglas did a virtual interview. I did one with him for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which he won an Oscar for producing that movie. So it's been so exciting for me to see how enthusiastic the top people from classic Hollywood, but also contemporary Hollywood. I mean, Paul Thomas Anderson, he's obsessed with TCM. Tom Ford watches TCM nonstop. A lot of really Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks. There's a lot of people that we love who seem to love us back, and that's been a real thrill in the years that I've been officially at TCM now.
And just to tack on to that, I was just, not to interrupt, but one of the things that we've observed, and we didn't really think of it very much before, but now it is definitely something we want to leverage, is we do have an incredible standing in the creative community, and we represent, the inspiration for these filmmakers. As you said, P.T. Anderson, Marty Scorsese, Spielberg, newer ones like Sean Baker. And I think it's like they understand the value of these movies that have fueled their own imagination, and they don't want it to go away. They want to do whatever they can, really, for the cause. So they do things like come to our film festival. They help us with certain areas of like interest in restoration. They direct us to films that we might not have been aware of. It's almost like it's their club as much as it is a network. And that's a unique place to be. There really aren't networks who get that kind of association with the best and the brightest in the creative community.
My guess would be that passion would really live with the directors, because I would guess, maybe more than the actors or others in the community, would really sort of know the history of it. Do you find that as well? Or is it, and are you pleasantly surprised when an actor has that passion?
Oh, it's definitely actors
or
too.
Is it uniform?
Yeah, no, it's definitely actors. It's filmmakers, across the board. But one of, my new favorite actors, Brian Cox from Succession, has just been recently talking about how he learned to talk through classic movies. And again, he was one who said TCM is on 24/7. He loves it. We're absolutely working on having him on as a guest very soon because he's so great in Succession. And the other thing I was going to say is, recently we had Ava Duvernay as a host of one of our primary franchises called The Essentials. And what was really cool about Ava, apart from, all her work, was she was looking to introduce new films into the canon through her selections. And that's what we get to do. It shouldn't just be the folks that I was taught, in film school. It should continue to be an ever widening opportunity for filmmakers who didn't always get access to the money or the distribution. And it could be because they're international filmmakers who, would have been maybe not as easily consumed by domestic audiences. But that's honestly something we take really seriously. We want to keep widening that canon because it's so important and it's within our grasp.
Dave, a couple of the questions that I've gotten from our audience are about, if you have a movie that maybe, has scenes in it or parts in it that wouldn't be appropriate for an audience in 2021, but it was made in the 60s or whatever, as you're showing that movie and talking about that movie, do you lean into that and the opportunity to sort of talk about it, or does that impact what movies you're going to show? Has it gotten to a point where there's things that you just that the network or you as a host just don't want to sort of go there, or just how do you think about the way particularly some of the groups in our society were treated in movies long ago, that sort of they wouldn't be represented on screen now in that way? Like, how do you think about that and reconcile that when you're recommending movies to Pola and the rest of the team, or where you're hosting them on in front of the camera?
Well, I'll just say one really quick thing, which is that by and large, we as hosts are not programming the movies. We have an incredible programming team who are like the brain trust of TCM bar none. And 95% of the times the films that are shown on TCM are because they've themed them and done the research and just been figured out that they're available and come up with it that way. But to your point, these discussions this is what we and the writers and producers are talking about nonstop. And it really is a case by case basis. But if I'm showing, let's give an example of Yankee Doodle Dandy, a tremendous Oscar-winning movie, James Cagney playing this iconic composer, George M. Cohan, but there is a fairly prominent scene of blackface in the film. So we would be remiss if I, as a host, didn't make mention of it, warn the audience, let them know it's coming, explain that this was something that did happen, fairly often back in the early 40s when this movie was made, and just kind of ease them into it that way so that it's not super jarring or as jarring as it would be without any, preface. But, we've talked about this when we show John Wayne movies. There was a lot of brouhaha after the Playboy magazine interview that he had done back in the early 70s resurfaced and had a lot of, really troublesome language and commentary in it. So we talk about this, we talk about this in relation to Woody Allen. If we show a Woody Allen movie, and a lot of it depends on, is there a theme that night that this kind of discussion would really fit into? Or is it more something that we can just kind of make a passing mention of near the end of the intro? But by all means, it doesn't mean we're going to stop showing the movies. It's just our job we're never going to edit out anything, because that's our big mantra, uncut and commercial free. And TCM will always be that way. But it is our job to make mention of some of these more problematic or troublesome aspects of these films.
Yeah, and one of the other things we do to address some of these complexities of these films that come from deep in our past, and then frankly, not so deep in our past either, right? I mean, we create sort of short form content that can live on the air and you'll get exposed to over time. And blackface was one of those, particularly because it is so surprising, when you're watching like this beautiful Fred Astaire movie and all of a sudden, wait, what? Blackface pops up. So I think it helps. We want to bring people along. We want to give them the information that helps them understand the period, not all glorious, let's be honest. And it's for you to decide what you make of it, but we want to give you that information.
Okay, so let's do a quick hitter here. I've got my pen and my paper. So question for both of you. Give us a couple of movies, homework over the next couple of weeks. If there's a couple of movies that you would say to get a good, when you think about TCM and like, here's a couple of your favorites that you've really sort of grown to love as a result of your work. What would you put on our to-do list as movies we should seek out?
You go first, Dave.
Well, my favorite classic film is All About Eve, a Best Picture winner, written and directed by the great uncle of my fellow TCM host, Ben Mankiewicz, Joseph Mankiewicz. And it's just a completely juicy behind the scenes story of the entertainment industry with just you've all heard fasten your seatbelts, it's going to be a bumpy night. That's Betty Davis line from that movie. It's just the greatest, and every line is just impeccable. I mentioned Penny Serenade. I am going to be introducing that on New Year's Day, so you can watch me do that on New Year's Day, because it's just a total weepy.
It's so sad, Dave.
I know, and it's got good music in it. I love that. And the movie that was kind of my personal gateway into classic film was one that I saw as part of my intro to film class with Jane Gaines when I was a Duke student, and that's a movie called Laura from the early 40s, a really stylish, glamorous murder mystery movie with beautiful people and a great score. I would highly recommend that people watch Laura. I think it's about 85 minutes long, so you're in and you're out.
Yeah, that's a weeknight movie. I love it.
I love that you know the runtime.
All right, Pola.
So I gotta say, this is one I've always used as my reference point. It used to be in LA when you interview for jobs, whatever they were, they would say, what are your favorite movies? And I always felt like a dum-dum because they meant like Back to the Future. And I would say Notorious, which is a Hitchcock movie with Cary Grant. Again, another Cary Grant movie. Can't go wrong. Ingrid Bergman. And it's this awesome combination of dark romance, incredible production value across the board. The gowns that Ingrid Bergman wears and the hair styles are incredible. And it's seductive because it's also got Nazis, it's got poison, it's got a really mean mother-in-law, and ultimately all that just continues to ratchet up the tension to the very last frame. One of my all-time favorites. Please,
All right.
please
Give us another one.
And when you mentioned Laura, my mind went to Leave Her to Heaven, Gene Tierney, just again, one I only saw more recently as part of my life at TCM in incredible Technicolor. Again, gorgeous production value, which isn't always my, kind of criteria, but it really is this incredible kind of luxe cabin experience. And the heroine / villain goes to great lengths to secure the devotion of her partner. Nothing and nobody can get in her way. And I don't want to say much more than that because it is another one that just wrecks you, it just takes you through. So you can't believe that's going to happen. And she's going to do that and what? And all the while looking supremely elegant. A really, really good one.
Yeah. So, so maybe on a little more seriously, the pandemic has impacted all of us. It's impacted every business that we work in. So, nobody was going to movie theaters, but that's not quite what you guys are doing. You're not showing necessarily in theaters. You're on the TV. So how did that impact your business? What did it make you decide that there was anything that you should sort of push more into, or did you pull back? How did the pandemic, change your operations?
Yeah, it's so interesting since obviously as a network, the primary focus for us is an at-home experience. We have these in real life experiences, but it was really doubling down on what we do. And I think what we recognize really quickly, and this is based on viewer feedback, is people were watching even more than normal. And they were really looking for some kind of escape and comfort. And comfort doesn't have to mean, like just a comedy or a light movie. It's just they wanted to get out of where they were. And this was such a good opportunity for them. And, I know talking to Dave and our other hosts, they've heard that from people who approach them, like, you've helped me get through this. Because like every night you're guaranteed, to see a friendly face from TCM in your living room. And that's been really interesting because, these movies in many cases were created during times of great national despair, the Depression, World War II, sort of the turbulence of post-war leading into the 60s. So movies have always provided that. I think this is just another example where that's why we crave these things. We want to get away. We want to see someone else's story. Good, bad, funny, sad, even Penny Serenade, which I honestly can almost not watch. It breaks my heart that much as I love Cary Grant. So that's been really phenomenal for us. And the other thing, and this is kind of fun, we have also a wine club because don't movies and wine go together like, cookies and milk? And during the pandemic,
I perked up. I'm wanting to hear more, as I'm sure many of our guests are.
So it's been really interesting. The wine club has over delivered, shall we say, since the pandemic. We saw our sales go up quite a bit because, again, I think people were home more. You're not going out, so might as well enjoy with some really cool TCM wine. Anyway, really an unexpected outcome.
Dave, tagging on that, like, what kind of interactions do you often have with fans when people come up to you? I mean, it might have been more. Is it always heartfelt? Has it been more so because of the sort of what TCM has meant to people during the pandemic. Give us a sense of when people recognize you, on the street or at the grocery store or whatever. What is a typical interaction of like with the TCM fan?
Well, what's been really fascinating to me is that, as I said, for 20 years, I've been doing the Today Show on a regular basis, which arguably has a bigger viewership
Sure.
than TCM, but very rarely would I get stopped by someone who would say, "Oh, I want to talk about the Today Show." Totally different animal now with TCM. And now that I'm more of a fixture there, and it's been 5 years since I guest hosted at first, and now 3.5 years since I've been on every month, it's just kind of exploded. And what's really been fun lately is that it's now some younger people who seem to be coming up. I was just at the Savannah Film Festival last weekend and was approached by this guy who was probably 28 years old and asked if he could take a picture with me, and how excited he was to show his girlfriend that he had run into me on the street and how much TCM, just loved TCM. That's been fun. And Ben Mankiewicz, my fellow host, says something really interesting, which is, he said, what's another network where you can hear someone say, I love this whole network? I would argue maybe Bravo has a similar fan base where it's someone who loves the network itself and not just a show here or a show there. But there's something about TCM, and there's a lot of people that have it on as almost like wallpaper, and they have it on all day long. So there is a definite connection between us and our viewers, and it's hilarious at the film festival and the cruise. And Pola is like a total celebrity on these events too, because they know her. They know who she is. She might not be on the channel, but they know who she is. So they're going up to her too, and all the other executives. So that's been really, really fun.
Can I just add one thing? I'm
Yeah,
so sorry,
please.
Nathan, but I'm trying to look at the questions as they come. One of the things I have to shout out, someone said, who else had Jane Gaines? I think when I was taking her classes, it was like her first few years of being at Duke. She was, still a young professor. And my husband, who was on the call somewhere, and I both just revered her as a teacher. She was, again, she kind of changed the course of my life. And so years and years and years and years and years later, it was so fun to go to her saying, 2 of your favorite students are now married and have kids, and they are as into movies as we were. And it really, she has so much to do with it. And honestly, that it was a bit of an oasis at Duke for people like me who weren't pre-med or pre-law or pre-Wall Street. I had no clue what I was going to do, but I was like, oh, that's something. There's a tuning fork there for me to look for in the future. So thanks for that Jane Gaines shout out there.
Chris O'Neill says that you have a podcast that you need to reference here.
Oh God, thank you, God, Chris. I actually wrote it down because I knew I'd forget. We've got season 3 of TCM's podcast, which is called The Plot Thickens. And it's started as an experiment. Our first one was with Peter Bogdanovich, looking at his life and career, and it's really an amazing story. The filmmaker, whose real life really was as dramatic as his movies. This summer, we had a podcast about the making of the kind of notorious bonfire, the Vanities, and it's called Devil's Candy. And it's an amazing look at behind the scenes of a cluster, but really incredible because it's Tom Hanks and Melanie Griffith and Bruce Willis. So this newest one is got such a broad appeal. It's about Lucille Ball. And it is, again, we just dropped episode 3. It's already our most successful pod season to date. And our team is remarkably small, but mighty in developing this story as audio journalists, going to, like incredible archives. Everything that Lucy ever said or did is surfaced in this. And you think Lucy, you don't know Lucy. Her life story is the stuff of epic narrative. And she also, apart from her being sort of America's favorite comedian, was this businesswoman with foresight and vision. And ultimately, she had amongst her stable of contract employees, contract actors, she had our own Robert Osborne, who ultimately became the TCM host. And she helped him navigate his career. She was bossy as all get out. And you kind of got to love that. Thank you for the plot thickens. Sharon.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks to Chris. So Dave, your experience as you sort of rubbing elbows with a lot of celebrities, you got a good story for us, either with your TCM hat on or otherwise about a funny encounter with somebody that we know and maybe love or don't love.
My favorite story, which I've told, is that I was sent to France, the south of France, to interview Angelina Jolie for a cover story for Entertainment Weekly. I'd never met her. And we met at this beautiful hotel for lunch. I remember she ate a steak for lunch, which I thought was just so cool. And we spent an hour and a half together, and she was so nice and lovely and way more down to earth than I expected. This was when she was pregnant with her twins. So she was being followed everywhere by the paparazzi. We finished the interview. She was renting a house nearby. I guess the paparazzi had followed her from her house to the hotel, waited for her while we were doing the interview so that they could get a picture of her. So we're saying goodbye in front of the hotel, and we're about to get in the cars and go away. And she said, and I put my hand out to say, thank you so much for being such a great interview. It was nice to meet you. And she said, well, we're in Europe, so let's kiss like the Europeans do. So we kissed on the cheek, and then we kissed on the other cheek, and then we said goodbye. And she did notice that there were some photographers like 50 yards away at the gates of this hotel taking her picture. She didn't seem to care. Well, the next day, my best friend who was back in New York said, oh my God, look at this. And she sends me a link, and it's a paparazzi shot of, I guess they had taken a picture in between kiss 1 and kiss 2, and it looked like we were kissing on the lips. And the headline is Angelina Jolie kissing another man in France. She was married to Brad Pitt at the time. And all these people were, trying to figure out who was this guy. And I guess like 100 comments down, someone said like, guys, that's Dave Karger from Weekly, and he's gay. So that shut up the whole.
I love it.
Concept, but
that's a great one. That's a great one. Pola, any stories jump to mind for you?
Yeah, I have to say the most recent one that still just, knocks my socks off is I had an opportunity to have like a 3-hour lunch with Francis Ford Coppola at the Telluride Film Festival, and TCM helped bring a restoration of his film, The Outsiders, to the festival. He was so grateful, and he said, I'd love to sit down and talk. And we're thinking a photo op, couple of pictures, right? And you're on your way. And it ended up being 3 hours of him regaling us with incredible stories of his career. But he was also incredibly curious about my slow rise to where I am now. Well, then what did you do? Where did you go to film school? Oh yeah, that's a good school. I mean, just really remarkable. But to me, the pinnacle of the moment was we were talking about his film, The Conversation. If you've seen it, Gene Hackman, an amazing sort of a paranoid thriller. And I had written a paper on that for Jane Gaines back in college.
Oh,
yeah. And
full
so
circle. I love that.
Yeah, exactly. He was talking about it, and I said, oh, I love that movie so much. And I'm sure people say that all the time. And he was talking about what he learned as a director. One of the key things to do is figure out what is the theme of your movie, so that anytime anyone comes to you with a question about, is this the chair you want in this room? Is this the color of the wallpaper you want? Is this the car, our talent would be driving? Whatever it is, he said, you put it through that theme as a filter, and you can make that decision. So he said, one of the garments that Gene Hackman wore was going to be a raincoat, and wardrobe brought out 3 different raincoats, and he said, I want that one. It's a weird raincoat. It's kind of transparent. And he said, that's the one, because he's disconnected from life and paranoid about his world. That's kind of what he wears all the time, whether or not it's a real raincoat or not. His name is Harry Caul, I believe. So Caul is like another, CAUL is another way of referencing that container that he has around him. So in this moment, I said to him, I'm like, that was my paper. I literally said, that is what I wrote about, specifically that garment and what I thought it represented, and hugely thrilling. And there were pictures too. So that was good. I can prove I was there. He was amazing.
It's good. It's good to have a picture. So we have like a minute left. And thank you to everybody for sticking with us. So plug something for us. So Pola, what should we be on the lookout for on TCM? And Dave, you're going to go next. Tell us the next time when we can see you, or what you're excited about. And that could be January 1st.
Yeah. Well, the thing that just popped into my mind, the TCM Film Festival is going to be back in real life in Hollywood. We just announced that we were going to be, returning, and we go on sale pretty soon. So keep an eye out. Have we announced the on sale dates yet, Dave?
I don't think so.
Okay, but it's coming soon.
All right.
And it's going to be super exciting. Would love to see you in Hollywood in April.
Who wouldn't like that? Dave, what do you got?
I have a really cool series that I'm hosting every Monday night in November. So it actually starts this Monday, the 1st. And it's a series that I helped come up with a friend of mine named Adam Shankman, who's a great film director. He did the Hairspray movie with John Travolta from, 10 years ago. He did Rock of Ages. He just directed Enchanted 2, which is going to be called Disenchanted. So he and I came up with a series which is the best dance numbers ever on film. So every Monday in November, starting this Monday at 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 Pacific, it's just great musicals. And some of them I'm just hosting myself, talking about them, but one movie each night. And this Monday it's Fame. Adam joins me and we talk about, because he's also a choreographer, not just a director. He's a dancer too. So we talk about why these dance numbers are so kind of revolutionary and important. So that's just a great kind of kick your shoes off and have some fun every Monday.
I love it. And that's another thing that, sort of the dance musical has come back. I think it's just representative of the fact that that is a genre like so many others that have different value at different times, and you reinterpret, whether it's In the Heights or West Side Story coming soon
Exactly.
from Spielberg, right?
Exactly. Well, this has been awesome. You guys have been so generous to hang out with us and share with us your stories, both personally and what's happened at TCM. So I have a renewed sense of interest to watch you guys and see what you're going to be doing and learn some more about movies. So thanks so much for your time. Great to see you guys. And thanks to everybody who joined us. We had a wonderful crowd today, and I hope that you felt like it was an hour well spent. So I sure did. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you,
did great.
Jason. Thank you,
Thanks so
everyone.
much.
Appreciate
Bye,
it.